everyone, and welcome to this week's Naked Truth. Trisha Hershberger here, fresh out of the shower. All natural, just the way I was put on this earth, so that I can give you the most honest vlog possible. That's a little refresher for those who are new to the Naked Army community. That's what we do. You never see any naughty bits. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and thank the rest of the Naked Army who sent in their own Naked Truths last week and shared their lesser known video game love. That's Daniel, Dominic, James, Prescott, and Kristen, Hiram, Christopher, Drew, Michael, and Lawrence. If you want to check out their Naked Truth vlogs, you can do that in the description below. Today I wanted to talk about a more serious topic, and I'm sure it will get a little controversial in the comment sections, but that's okay, because we're all learning from each other, hopefully, and not just bashing the people that we don't agree with, because it makes us do work to re-examine our own thoughts. Haha! So today we're going to talk about racism, and this is brought on by a couple things, namely everything going on in the news lately between the Charleston shootings, all the incidences of police brutality, President Obama saying the N-word, and Walmart banning the Confederate flag. All of that's been going on. Plus, I know I always ask you guys for Naked Truth topic suggestions, and a while ago, Zephyr Bat said, Trisha, I'm mixed race, ethnically ambiguous person like yourself. I receive very different attitudes from strangers based off where I am and whether or not they've heard me speak English. And I have also been on the receiving end of racial hate from all races. What have your race-related experiences been, and have you ever felt isolated by being racially different from everyone? And so just to start off answering that question, I joke around that I'm ethnically ambiguous because that's kind of the term in Hollywood breakdowns. When you go out for different roles, they'll use the term ethnically ambiguous a lot. They like that. My background is actually Italian, Irish, and Pennsylvania Dutch, and between the Pennsylvania Dutch side and the Italian side, I tend to tan very easily. So sometimes, especially here in Southern California, people will assume that I speak Spanish if it happens to be the more tan time of year. Obviously now is not that time of year for me. I have been out of the sun. And then people assume that I am, a super white person, which sometimes you get definitely hate and different treatment for that too here in Southern California. But it's different everywhere. And I see comments on videos sometimes that they think that I'm part Asian because when I smile, my eyes squinch up. But yeah, my background is Italian, Irish, and Pennsylvania Dutch. And while I can't really think of any times that I have really felt isolated by that, my little sister definitely has. And she comes from the same parents as me, same ethnic background mix as me. And she, because she's done a lot of work in other countries that get more sun, and countries that predominantly speak Spanish, she speaks fluent Spanish, and she tends to be darker toned more often than I am throughout the year. And she has gotten both from, when she's working in another country, people there referring to her as gringa, white girl. But when she's here, she actually had one of the guys she was dating, his grandpa, they were Irish, I believe, redhead family. His grandpa didn't approve of him dating a brown girl. And we were just kind of like, what does that mean? Like, what is your assumption about brown girls? So I hope that she doesn't mind me sharing those experiences of hers, but that's probably the closest I've ever felt to it, that's the closest I've ever felt to it other than what I've experienced here in Southern California, which is mostly just people see that I'm, a little bit paler than everybody else and speak English, and so they assume that I'm, I don't know, either uptight or stuffy or think that I'm better. And I've had a few instances where people have kind of initially perceived me as that, and I've had to, say, oh, no, that's not the case. I'm trying, we can have a normal conversation. This is normal. And so I looked up the definition of racism according to Google Dictionary is the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. So really now when we get into this discussion, we're talking about assumptions based on race. And I feel like it's a lot easier for people to make assumptions based on someone's race than to actually learn or educate themselves based on a person's background. Of course, it's a lot easier to say, oh, well, I have this one experience with this one type of race, so I'm just going to assume that everyone's like that. Or I've heard this one joke made about this race, so I'm going to assume that everybody's like that. And certainly, stereotypes are there because they are something that occurs multiple times. Like, people get stereotypes from that, but people also get stereotypes from what they've been taught from their communities, from their upbringing, etc. And psychologically, it's very hard for people to let go of those stereotypes. And so it's hard because I want to say racism is based on ignorance. And in some ways it definitely is because you haven't educated yourself, but in some ways it's not because you have learned things over time. I think people learn hate. And what I mean by that is when you grow up, when you're a little kid, I don't know, I cannot believe that inherently as a little kid you would look at someone of a different race and think nasty things about them. That is something that is learned. So when you're at your most uneducated, I believe that, we all are very accepting of people because we don't know any better. And then, so it's hard for me to say 100% racism is based on ignorance because on one hand it is learned, but on the other hand, you have a lot more to learn. In my experience, when I grew up in an area where there was not a lot of diversity, and that saddens me because I didn't have that opportunity to learn. But the good thing about that was that I didn't, I moved into Philadelphia from like the farm towns outside of Philadelphia. When I moved into Philadelphia, I was kind of smacked in the face with a lot of really racist attitudes. People were very, very segregated as to where they lived, where they hung out. And I thought that there should be nothing wrong with me walking over to this section of town and going to this church. And, people were like, oh, you cannot do that. You cannot go into that town. You cannot talk to, people in this section of town and all this kind of stuff. And on one hand, yes, they were looking out for me. But on the other hand, I was like, but why? But I don't understand why. And so then I learned that, people have these inherent attitudes, which is exactly what President Obama said, when he made headlines for saying the N-word. But what he was essentially saying is that, let me see if I can find the quote here. I don't have, oh, here we go. The quote is, societies don't overnight completely erase everything that happened 200 or 300 years prior. So I do think that that's true. And I think that the belief that racism will die out with age, like as the old people die out, it'll get better. Certainly, I do think the younger generation as a whole has a better outlook on it. But again, this is another assumption. I mean, if you look at the Charleston shootings, the guy who did that was 21. He's certainly not old. So that type of attitude and that type of hate and racism is definitely prevalent in youth still. So what can we do to try to overcome it? I feel like I'm kind of beating a dead horse with this, but I feel like what we can do as a whole and spreading to other people is to just try to educate ourselves as much as possible. I don't know if you know the song, Everyone's a Little Bit Racist Sometimes. It's musical theater. But I think it's funny because it is a little true. We tend to think of racism as black or white, good or bad. There's no gray area. You're either a racist and that means you're a bad person, or you're not a racist at all and that means you're a good person. And I think that the truth really probably lies in that we all do have assumptions, whether we realize it or not. And so what we can do to combat this is try to educate ourselves as much as possible to just being aware, maybe if we have these kind of assumptions about other people, and trying to learn about other people's backgrounds and other people's cultures so that we don't make decisions or treat people based on some preconceived notion that we have or something we've been taught. We're basing it on actual life experience. So my question to you guys is, how do you choose to combat this in your life? Or do you not choose to combat this in your life and you think that I'm full of crap? Either way, let us know in the comments section down below, or make your own Naked Truth vlog about it. As always, when we do things that are a little bit more controversial, please combat people's opinions, not the person themselves. If you disagree with someone, don't attack them personally. Say why you disagree with them. And I understand that that takes a little bit more work, but that's what, open dialogue and discussion is all about. So thank you guys so much for tuning in this week, and I will see you next week on The Naked Truth.